The bad news is that God is somehow angry. The wrath of God comes down. Despite all this wonderful things going on, somebody did something wrong. The wrath of God comes down. It comes on a ship. In 1347, a ship comes into the port of Messina. It came from the Black Sea. A trading ship coming from the Black Sea arrives in Sicily, and the sailors on that ship are dying. They are dying covered in black bubbles. The Italian word for a bubble is a bubo. They've got the bubos all over them, these nasty black bubbles, and then when they fall over finally, they go into a dance of death, this twitching. Just unbelievable. They'll get this boat out of there, try to get it out, and but it does spread. The buboes have gotten on shore somehow. This is the spread of the bubonic plague. And it's going to spread all across Europe. You just can't stop it. It spreads from Sicily. It's going to jump over to Italy, over to the boot, up the boot, over to France. As people run from it, it seems to follow them from city to city. This terrible black bubbles with the dance of death at the very end from city to city. And it seems to be moving along the trade routes. As you run from it, it seems to follow you. And it will encompass Europe from the south to the north, starting in Italy, and it will sweep across Europe from south to the north. And it's quite nasty. It's going to leave a mark. That's something that they'll never forget. You'll see lots of art. People who survive this will see their mortality. You'll see pictures of death that awaits everyone. We have drawings of people covered in buboes. Lots and lots of macabre art, as death is very real now to you. It could come at any moment. This is the Black Death, the bubonic plague. It landed in 1347. By 1348, it sweeps through France. By 1349, it jumps over to England. It sweeps through the German states. By 1350, it's up into Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden. We know that it mutates into a mnemonic form, and this makes it even more deadly. It was spreading a certain way in the early stages, and at some point it turns into a mnemonic form, actually spread through breath. You could breathe it on somebody. And then it goes away. It does come back occasionally. It will rear its head, and this will really make you paranoid that occasionally it will pop up in certain places, 1361, 1369, and you'll see it for centuries, actually. This leaves Europeans in a constant fear that this could swipe through again and kill half the population again. Well, they didn't know what was happening here. They might have figured out somehow that where rats were around, there seemed to be a lot more of the bubonic plague. So some of them recognize it may be dirt and filth, and you'll see a lot of people run away from the cities. Well, it's not the rat, and it's not the fleas on the rat. It's the bacteria carried in the fleas on these rats. So yeah, they were right in one way, that filth and rats, your chances of living weren't good. So here's a map showing the spread of this, starting at Sicily here, and then sweeping through Italy and France. That's the first year. Here's the first year, here's the second year, third year, fourth year, as it sweeps through Europe. You might notice something on the map, and we'll come back to this in a second, that there's a couple of places where it didn't hit at all. The city of Milan, here in Italy, didn't get hit. Somewhere along the Spanish-French border here didn't get hit. And then a huge area of present-day Poland and Germany didn't get hit at all. As it sweeps through, it kind of left a few places. Some places, maybe just lucky, the rats didn't go that direction. Let's look at the death rate. We estimate, and again, this is an estimate, because they didn't keep track of this stuff, but we kind of guessed looking at the mass graves and things. Maybe 50% of the population in a city, this would just bring death upon the middle class. Maybe 25 in other cities, so it kind of varies from place to place, maybe depending on how filthy or how fast people ran from it. And then again, it bypassed some places. Some cities you didn't get hit by it at all. What kind of total death are we talking about for Europeans? Again, the number varies. Depending on what book you look at, depending on what scientist is trying to extrapolate information, maybe 20 million, maybe 200 million people, depending on what book you read. The answer probably somewhere in the middle. Let's pick maybe 50 million people dying from the Black Death, but this would just bring a wave of destruction across Europe. We're able to laugh at it today. I picked up a couple of pictures here. There's a type of beer called the Black Death beer, and then if you're Family Guy fans, one of the characters is Death, and he's kind of funny, He's not evil, he's just doing his job. But at the time, this would have been the worst thing ever. This would have been the apocalypse. And we actually have a good account of it. An Italian named Boccacio ran from it with a group of friends and wrote a book about it. It's called Decameron, a collection of 12 stories. 12 stories put together to, as these people are trying to hide in the Italian hills or something, storytelling. And he also gave a vivid description of what it was like to get the Black Death. Well, what kind of reaction? I already told you one, they run from it. Well, other reactions include praying. You know, if this is the wrath of God, then maybe you should pray for forgiveness. Repent anything you've done. Maybe you were the one that brought this down. Maybe it's everyone. Maybe we need to start living a more pious life, and so you'll see a revival of religious fanaticism. One of the things that happens, there's kind of a bizarre thing that happens, is the idea of flagellation, flagellants. People going out in public and whipping themselves to show everyone that they're not the one. Now, they're asking for forgiveness, and they'll punish themselves. Oh, this is actually a phenomenon all over Europe. Strangely, this was condemned by the church. As these people go out in public and are whipping themselves, the Catholic Church will take action against this. And the reason for this is that you can't do it this way. You can't seek forgiveness, according to church doctrine, outside the church. You have to be inside the church. You have to talk to a priest. You have to give confession. You have to follow these rules. You can't just take it upon yourself to whip yourself away from sin. I picked this picture here too. One of the strange phenomenons is this people wearing bird masks for some reason. Either they thought birds weren't getting it, or they were filling the mask with flower petals or something, try to keep the bad air away. But the flagellants are all over. Lots of pictures and descriptions of the flagellants as they take to the streets trying to survive the plague. One more thing happens here. The Jews. In all of this mass chaos and death, Christians begin, to accuse the Jews of doing this. How? Some kind of poison. The Jews must have poisoned the well. Here's a couple of pictures of medieval Jews. They were forced to wear different outfits. You would spot the Jews. They were not allowed to dress like Christians. These medieval Jews, they had to wear stars even. Who are they? Well, they're outside the feudal system. They're not part of the feudal system. The feudal system required oaths, Christian oaths, and the Jews aren't Christians, so they can't be part of the feudal system. They lived in these cities. This is kind of a great age for cities, and it's a great age for them. They were given a piece of a city, and they had to pay rent on this. This certain district that they were given from certain streets is called a ghetto. This is the word that they used. And then they were only allowed to interact with Christians on certain ways. Only certain professions were they allowed to outside the ghetto. For instance, money lending. Christians could borrow money from Jews. Christians had outlawed usury. Muslims outlawed usury, but Jews were doing it. And then also tailoring. They seem to be really good at this, making clothes. And then attacks. They did suffer attacks, and sometimes official attacks. The government would get angry at something and then start attacking Jews. And we use the word pogrom. This is a Russian word, but they suffer official attacks when the government will just start attacking Jews or encouraging the population to attack. They're called pogroms, and this is going to be a big one. From 1347, 1348, attacks on Jewish communities, blamed for poisoning the wells. And they get attacked, and the atrocities ensue. Mass executions. One of the examples that we have a first-hand description of is the attack at Strasbourg. This is a city along the Rhine. You see the word Strasbourg, a city along the Rhine. And they gathered up their Jews there in the city and burned them. Offered to let them become Christians, and then mass burned people in the ghetto. Well, some Jews will get away. The Jews who survive this will flee out of Europe. Where do you go? Well, you flee away from the plague. Over to Eastern Europe. Again, I showed you that map. Part of Eastern Europe didn't get hit at all, and that's where you'll want to go to get away from the plague. They moved beyond the plague to the east into what is present-day Poland, where a bunch of Poles were living, and then all the way over to Russia. You will see Jews moving into that area. The Russian Tsar will actually give them a place to live called the Pale of Settlement, where Jews were allowed to live in a certain part of Russian territory. Now this goes on for centuries, and then gradually some Jews will start to work their way back toward Western Europe, gradually trickling back to the cities of Western Europe. Well, let's talk about the plague again. Get back to the plague, the Christians and the plague. Well, again, the population cut in half. What's the effect of that? What happens when you lose half your population? Well, obviously disruption. Obviously, instability. There's the chaos everywhere. Well, what about wages? If you survive this thing, and now we need to rebuild, there's fewer people around, the money is still there, so I want more money. And then you'll also have, as the cities begin to rebuild, serfs, people living in the feudal system wanting to come to the cities. There's work available in the cities as they rebuild. Well, what's the reaction of the nobles in the feudal system or the wealthy people who control the cities? Well, they don't want to increase wages. Despite losing half the population sometimes, they will attempt to control the wages, try to keep prices down. And then on the countryside, the nobles who live in the castle and own serfs will attempt to reassert their ownership of serfs. You can't just leave and walk away. Well, the other result is going to be the ugly part of all this, revolt and war. And this is going to be a nasty time after 1347, after the Black Death. There's a wave of revolts and wars all over Europe. In France, they call them Jacqueries, the Jacques, the typical name of a Frenchman, Jacques. So a typical Frenchman is called a Jacques, and this will be Jacqueries, the uprising of the typical Frenchman. 1358, 10 years after the Black Death, the Frenchmen rise up and want more money and want to get away from the feudal system. Serfs will begin attacking nobles everywhere. There's all kinds of death as these serfs attack the castles. And then inside the cities, you'll actually see workers take over cities. The problem with this is there's no unity here. It's just an angry uprising against the powers that be. And eventually they'll be snuffed out. These uprisings will be defeated. But from France, it spreads all over, basically, all over Europe. You'll see lots of urban riots about price controls. The city of Ghent in Belgium, the city of Rouen in France, the city of Florence in Italy, huge urban riots as the workers take to the streets. And the powers that be in the cities are called guilds. Guilds are the upper echelons of entrepreneurs who control products and control prices. One example is the city of Paris. A man named Etienne Marcel, a wealthy businessman, will get the workers on his side and actually took over the city of Paris in 1358. For a few months, he controlled the city and tried to bring a new age. And then eventually, the nobles will respond to this. The King of France himself will respond to this. And they will throw him out of a tower here. So this didn't last long, this kind of brush with maybe representative government of the middle class. In the countryside, a lot of peasant revolts. And one of the ones that gets a lot of fame, really, it deserves the fame, is in 1381. This is a bit later, but there's a huge uprising in England. The nobles were trying to keep the wages down, and on the countryside, trying to force feudal dues, trying to get the serfs to return to the land and give things to the nobles. And this set off the revolt. And we know who led it. The revolt was led by a guy named Wat Tyler and another Englishman named John Ball, and that's pretty much all we know about him, just a couple of guys. Well, Tyler, based on his name, we think he was a roof worker, just a common laborer who led this revolt. And then Ball was a minister of some sort, because we have some of his speeches that he gave, or sermons that he gave. So we call this the Wat Tyler Rebellion. It's going to be huge in England. This wave of peasants and workers began going around killing nobles who were trying to force the price control and force feudalism. So they began killing nobles. They even go to Canterbury and kill the Archbishop of Canterbury. That's the #1 religious guy in England. They kill the Archbishop. You have an army of peasants roaming England. Here's a little speech from Ball, one of his sermons.